Hi, I'm Dr. Crystal Beal, and thank you so much for joining me at QueerCME in this edition, our first edition of our Vodcast. I'm really excited to have this very special guest with me today. And I would love, Nicole, if you took a moment to introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for honoring me as your first guest. So my name is Nicole Gress. I am a speech-language pathologist. My pronouns are she, they, and my specialty is gender-affirming voice work.
Awesome.
I
was going to say, I feel like you're a little more than a speech-language pathologist as well. You have some other titles or roles. Do you want to tell us about those too?
Oh, yes, definitely. I am the founder and CEO of Undead Voice, which is an online gender-affirming voice platform.
Fabulous. Well, we're going to talk all about a vocal transition in this episode of the Vodcast. So I'm really excited to hear kind of your inside stories about all of the juicy details and referral information we need to know as medical providers. Before we jump into that, though, it's a big part of QueerCME and QueerDoc, our clinic, to really try to raise up voices that are part of our community as well.
Sure.
And so if you're comfortable sharing how you identify, we love to have that information for the folks listening at home.
Yeah, I identify as queer and gender fluid. And like I mentioned, my pronouns are she and they.
Fabulous. Awesome. And then, you know, we already brought up kind of the type of work you do within trans health, but can you tell us a little bit more about your history with trans vocal work?
Yeah, so I started out working in gender-affirming voice work when I was living in San Francisco. There was maybe predictably a large LGBTQIA+ population. So I was working at both a hospital and a private practice. And I worked for, oh man, doing math, about 4 years with gender-affirming voice clients before leaving those positions to start my own company, and moved to Seattle about a year ago and have continued. My whole program and company are all online, so it was really easy to make that transition.
Nice. And I think, you know, it might be obvious to the audience, Nicole and I have worked together before, so I know some of the backstory. But I think you've shared in the past about your experience with medical voice work for gender-affirming vocal transition, and then kind of the things you maybe thought were missing from that and the journey you took to help
my mission to
gaps.
Yeah, my mission to demedicalize
Yeah,
is where I'm at now.
Yeah, can you share a little bit about what you felt like was missing in the medical work you were doing, and then maybe some of the techniques or things you did on your journey to fill in those gaps? Yeah.
So the question is, what does it look like to go through, what was my journey from traditional medical model to Undead Voice Lab?
Yeah.
Okay. So I would love to talk about the journey that I took and working within the traditional medical model to ultimately quitting that and starting my own company that's a little bit non-traditional. So when I first started working in gender-affirming voice work, I practiced for about 4 years within the confines of the traditional medical model through both a hospital and a private practice. And what that process usually looks like is there would be an individual in the trans, non-binary, or gender questioning community who would be seeking voice transition, and they would reach out to their primary care physician, who would then refer them to a specialist, myself, often, for voice transition. And so in that more traditional medical model, that individual's journey looks like them coming in for their initial evaluation. We go through what their goals are for their voice and kind of set out a roadmap for their voice journey. And then every week they come in for a weekly voice lesson. In those voice lessons, I would show them a few exercises or techniques for them to meet their goals, to work towards their goals, and then give them a printout of a few exercises that they would then go home, practice diligently, hopefully, and then come back the next week and kind of show me how they did. Now, that model is the one that we used for, and that I worked within for a few years, but there were a few, after a while, a few glaring roadblocks. Often what would happen is individuals within that more traditional medical model would either lose insurance coverage before they found voice, or they would be paying out of pocket and be unable to continue to afford it, because the traditional model of voice transition typically takes 1.5 to 3 years to completely transition a voice. It's a really long time.
That is a long time.
It does not need to take that long, but within that weekly medical model, it tends to take that long, because often where that individual needs the most support and the most access to their coach is when they're practicing. Now, if you are within that traditional medical model, it really ties the hands of the provider to only be able to reach out and communicate to that individual, to their client during the weekly paid session.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter how many resources I sent, how many printouts, how many videos I sent them home. Ultimately, there are questions or there's little minor tweaks that they should be making during practice. That maybe
like when you're like learning how to do a dance and like you get one of the moves like wrong in your head, but then you learn the whole 8 count with that, 2 count wrong, and you just don't know. And then you go back to see your coach the next week and they're like, oh, but you've been practicing wrong this whole week.
Yeah. So then you don't get to move. Then you don't get to move on to a new skill. You have to spend the next week undoing the new habit that you learned. So not only are you trying to replace years and years and years of habitual speech patterns with a new pattern, but now you're trying to undo the wrong one that you created. And all of that can be solved by just increasing access to the coach. And so that was the biggest frustration that I would have, is that I was unable to touch base with and communicate to my clients in between our weekly lessons. And their growth is hugely stunted by how often they would have to redo work or just feel stuck in the process and frustrated at not being able to move faster through it. Right. So
our primary audience, right, for this podcast is healthcare providers. And so I think this is an audience that's really going to understand kind of the confines of not being able to engage with patients or clients very significantly outside of billable visits, just because of the way, like, how many patients we have to see during clinic, to meet kind of our productivity and all that kind of stuff. And so I think we all struggle with having enough time for administrative contact, where we manage our inbox and we connect with clients. And then obviously if you're also trying to like listen to video clips they're sending you or something like that, that's just not going to fit into a regular clinic schedule very easily.
There's some like psychological unspoken things here as well, which are, for example, who do you practice with? So if I have a client who maybe lives alone, or maybe lives with family or friends that aren't affirming, they're not socially transitioned, maybe they're not professionally transitioned, they don't have a community to actually use their transitioning voice with, it would be like learning a language but never speaking it out loud, or learning a language but never speaking with a native speaker or with anybody else who knows your language. It's really difficult without like that real life feedback of another individual to progress.
Right. And I mean, I feel like there's so much vulnerability when we're just talking about learning a language that is like, there's a whole like 1,000 other layers of vulnerability when we layer on the fact that this isn't another language, it's our identity. And it's, not only is it us striving to be or sound the way we want that affirms who we are, it's also this like, I'm going to imagine very vulnerable experience to like go through the process of sounding different, even when it's something we really want. Like there's just this like exposure and like rawness that comes through that process. I mean, I can only imagine.
Yeah. You hit the nail on the head, especially whenever we think about like as an adult who is investing in something, or not even an adult, just as an individual who is investing something, their time, their resources, their money, the expectation that somebody practices every single day is quite unrealistic. But imagine you're paying the average session cost of $150 to $200 a week for a voice therapist, and life gets in the way and you don't practice for a week. Then you come to the next session and you've not progressed. And there's this huge dark cloud of self-judgment and doubt around what you're doing. You're not taking advantage of your investment. You're losing out. You're falling behind. And that type of negativity, it has no place in voice transition that's already super vulnerable, and you're trying to explore your identity and who you are and find your voice. Yeah. It can make it really frustrating.
Yeah. So it definitely sounds like you could really empathize with your clients in that process, but I'm going to guess had some frustrations as well as a clinician.
Yes. I would say beyond not being able to openly be accessible to my clients, it took a while for me to really catch on to what was happening. But over time, I had some clients who would bring in clips, like YouTube clips with different techniques or strategies that they were finding online by other, let's say, community coaches or individuals who had lived experience in transitioning their voice without the help of a professional, who were demonstrating and teaching some non-traditional techniques. And by non-traditional, I mean things that weren't taught to us as speech language pathologists. Not to mention that we had like maybe like one unit and half of one course in graduate school. It's not like there's there's not even a universal curriculum on how to do gender affirming voice. So to, as a clinician, be expected to cover something that's within your scope of practice, but not really have the resources that have been taught to you through school or really tried and true continued education to access on that, the amount of actual skilled clinicians that are really qualified to do the work is like maybe 20 in the country. Like it's very low. And that's mainly because the traditional techniques that we're taught as speech language pathologists to do the work are primarily for voice rehabilitation. So if we're working with individuals who have voice disorders, not for gender affirming voice work. And so when I realized that they were bringing in clips, my first inclination, my first inclination was to like push back and be like, oh no, I wasn't taught this. I don't know this technique. I was told this is going to cause tension or pain. Stopped doing the work for 6 months and did my own like deep dive into what strategies and techniques were being used in the online world. I took so many voice classes and every voice pedagogy, singing pedagogy that existed, like breathing techniques, yoga, like anything that could be even partially related, and created a whole new curriculum for gender voice that maybe is 10% of what I learned as a speech pathologist and 90% of what I learned from my experience in community.
Wow.
Yeah, that was an exploration. And then started Undead Voice because I wanted to increase access, affordability, and remove a lot of those roadblocks we've already chatted about.
Yeah. And so I think in this journey you took, you definitely brought up a good point about the experience of our community with speech language pathologists who are, and maybe the clinician is feeling insecure and defensive in the moment. And maybe that is part of the reason they're becoming like paternalistic or gatekeeping in some fashion. Or like there's probably a layered complexity where they really are worried someone is going to hurt their voice or hurt themselves. You know, all of those things happen to us as providers and clinicians. And I think always, right, the goal for all of us is in that moment when our ego starts like getting involved to like take a deep breath and to slow down and just, I think for me, like always it's pause. And I feel like, you know, this is like for any non-clinicians listening, this is like maybe like secrets from the inside, but I feel like any of my family members or partners would like know when I'm having that moment in a visit, because that's when I'm like, keep your like very calm doctor face.
You go like,
right. Right. And that's me, like, that's me listening to my insides and like giving them a chance to like throw an internal temper tantrum and then shut the fuck up, because you know they're not the vulnerable like party at the table in this interaction. None of us never do that perfectly, but it sounds like you had a really transformative experience around that, where you actually like decided to take this what you were hearing from the community and like take that time to really do some like really huge work to figure out like what's my ego, what's my training, what's actually helping people, what does the community actually need.
It was definitely a humbling moment of, okay, if everybody is saying this and I'm the only one on this side, and I'm just echoing what I've been taught, and I'm echoing what other people are saying, but that who aren't really in the space, they're not online, they're not seeing the discourse, they're not doing that type of work, then there's probably something that I should shift on my end. So it's just a lot of deep listening and then trying out. Because it's easy for the pendulum to swing from one end to the other. One end being, I'm only going to do the traditional techniques that I was taught. The other being, sure, they may work, but I'm actually going to do everything that I hear online that other people are doing. And I have definitely landed in the middle. There are some techniques that are taught on YouTube or other online resources that I'm very much against, which I think should be like really acknowledged, that both areas have, you know, you have to, if you're a speech language pathologist and you're really trying to do the best care, it takes looking at every single piece of advice and using your clinical mind and deciding for yourself and experiencing with clients whether it works or whether it doesn't, and not just taking anything at face value.
Right. I think that's like such an important like statement to like really reflect on as clinicians. I call it a lot of times medical mythology. So in my experience, right, as a physician, I can't tell you how many times I was told something by a colleague or an attending, and I just took it at face value because they were like, had more experience, more training. They had been doing this longer and they were my teacher. Yeah. And I didn't like go back to the literature. I didn't go back to the resources. And then maybe I didn't even like use my clinical reasoning or like, you know, my brain to process through things. And then like 3 years later, like I'm like reading something for another purpose. And I'm like, wait, what the fuck? Like, the exact opposite of what that person said is true. And
yeah,
you know, the joke in medical school is always half of what you learn is going to be wrong in 10 years. You just don't know it half yet.
Yeah. That's a great that's a great joke.
Right. And I think it's so important as people working in gender affirming care, because the field is still so young, and the like funding for research is like, you know, horribly low. Like there's so many reasons for that, including a ton of discrimination and misogyny and racism and like all of the things. Is why we don't get a ton of evidence-based like high quality research in our field. And so clinical reasoning becomes that much more important, right? That like idea where you really like try to understand why what we're doing works, or why it's going to be helpful, or how it's going to be helpful for this person, as opposed to just like, if I see X, I do Y.
Definitely.
And that's just true for all of us in all the different spheres of this work. And I think it's great that, I don't know, for me as a clinician, it's always really affirming or normalizing to hear other clinicians have a similar journey and land in a similar space, right? Because sometimes when you're the clinician who's saying like, maybe we're doing this wrong, y'all, and like everyone else around you is not on that journey with you, and you're like, wait, am I just wrong?
I've recently, like, I like during, to be transparent, for the last maybe 2 years of having my own company, I've been reached out to by so many other speech language pathologists or the supervisors at graduate clinics, professors at schools who are saying, this is an area that we need to focus on. Do you have any resources? And like, one, it's really difficult because no, I don't have resources. I can tell you the journey that I went on, but unless you have 6 months of time and no other job, like, I don't know if you're going to be able to get to that same point. And then it's been an internal debate with myself a lot, because my mantra, like what I would really love to push, is community-centered resources and more trans voices and trans spaces. And I don't know that educating the speech language pathology community as a whole on how to do this work is really pushing an agenda that that follows my values. Like, my mission and vision is to increase access to skilled voice transition resources that are affordable, accessible, and that work fast, and that aren't gatekept by medicalization. Unfortunately, that doesn't necessarily look like training more medical providers like speech language pathologists on how to do the work, because often health insurance isn't covering. So essentially, we're educating a whole genre or a whole globe of providers who are still inaccessible because they have to charge what they should be paid. But that rate is much higher than a lot of individuals in the community or in general could ever afford. Like $150 to $200 a week for 1.5 to 3 years is wild.
Yeah.
Like, it's a total of $30,000 almost minum for a full voice transition.
Really fast math there. My brain was like, okay, maybe you can find a calculator.
3 years at $200 a week is $30,000.
Perfect. Yeah. So I think it's just, it's such an interesting experience to get to be in this field. Like, I know personally, like, serving my community has been such a joy. And, I always love getting to work with other clinicians who are also part of the community, because I do feel like I do get to have these moments where, like, I hear someone share something very similar to, like, my story, or I hear someone say something that is, like, something I also teach when I have trainees. And it's like, it is so affirming, because when we're surrounded by het, cis, like, very traditional healthcare workers, not that there is something wrong with those people inherently, right? We need doing all kinds of work, but our experience is so different that it can be really alienating and isolating. And so it's just such a joy as a clinician to connect with other clinicians. And I think we've, like, rambled off topic, which I'm sure this podcast is going to do in its entire existence. So if that's not a good fit for you as a listener, I apologize.
Bye.
It was lovely to meet you. You can find us at another time. But I do think, we both own, businesses. We both work from home. And I think one of the other things that, like, always when other providers come to me to, like, ask questions or anything like that I always encourage is, like, the networking and finding your community, because it can be so isolating. And also, like, I don't want to be making all these ideas and decisions and theories all by myself, and then, like, making up things that aren't benefiting my community, my patients, or myself. So if you're listening, that would be another, like, clinical pearl from a couple of people who've been doing this for a few years, is, like,
network
the fuck out of that shit.
Yes. See yourself and other people is so affirming, obviously. Yeah. It feels like so far we've set up, like, a really big problem. Maybe it would be useful to talk about the solution, because I think there are solutions. Yeah. Especially if the main audience for this is providers, it can feel like, all right, great, but that's what we've been told. Like, speech language pathologists are the great people to refer to, and it can feel disheartening to then I say that, but when I was networking, especially in San Francisco, where you would assume there would be really good networking, I would I reached out to a lot of surgeons who are doing gender affirming surgeries and asked them, so what do you say when people ask you, where do I go for voice work? And a lot of them say Google it. And I'm like, oh my God, please don't say Google it. Please don't say Google it. And so I think
we can do better.
For sure. From the provider side, what demedicalizing voice transition can look like is referring out to programs, practitioners, community coaches that aren't necessarily within the medical professional umbrella, right? So, like, I am a medical professional, a licensed speech language pathologist, but my program is demedicalized in that it is not taken by insurance. It does not fall under the umbrella of, like, the one-to-one lessons that have CPT codes. I don't give ICD-10 diagnoses. None of that is happening. I'm not providing super bills, but I price my program cheaper than copays. So it's not even a question. So there are definitely resources that are demedicalized. And I think knowing what they are and getting some education or some, like, referrals for those is the best step that you can do.
Right. And so very specific resources is always one of, like, the most asked things by clinicians at any event where we're teaching. And so I know some of the ones, like, I always keep in my back pocket,
Sure.
kind of similar to what you're talking about. I would love to hear yours and can go back and see. Yeah.
So typically
there's your program, which we're going to talk more about.
Yeah. I think so if a provider was just asking me, who do I refer? When do I refer? What do I refer to? My answer to that question, to get specific, you can here's a broad answer to a specific question. You can refer anybody out who is interested in exploring their voice. Often I have people come to me who are at the very beginning of their voice or of their transition journey, or maybe are just exploring their identity and are still, questioning it. And voice is a very safe, non-invasive way to do a lot of gender exploration, because we learn so much about ourselves when we hear ourselves speak in a voice that is not affirming and one that is affirming. So a lot of gender exploration happens just from voice work in general. As I mentioned, often it's non-invasive because I don't do vocal fold surgery, obviously. Not a surgeon.
Clinicians, there are surgeries that can be done for vocal transition, both to raise the pitch of your voice and to lower the pitch of the voice. I think a lot of clinicians won't realize that they go both directions for that. There's
keyword there is pitch, right?
Exactly, right? Yeah. Thank you for noticing my knowledge base. Much appreciated.
Yes.
Right, exactly. So there are so many other spheres of vocal presentation that are not affected by surgery at all. So while pitch change outcomes are pretty decent, like from surgical procedures, people aren't going to get changes in like rate and rhythm of speech, or where they place their inflections, or where they resonate their voice, all of which are part of how we kind of code gender as a society.
Yeah, the number one coder for gender, like perception of a voice, is actually resonance, and that's not typically altered by vocal fold surgery.
Right.
And so that is something, even if somebody goes through vocal fold surgery, they still have to see a professional. Ideally, they would see a professional or a coach who use a resource to address the other like 6, 7, 8 areas of voice. Right. So there's a lot involved.
And I usually recommend like a prehab appointment as well as like post-operative appointments, right? Because I want someone to go in with, like, I can talk a little bit about this, like you can hear, and I can probably talk about it a little bit more than a lot of clinicians.
Sure.
Maybe in part because like I have so many personal like family members who have like gone through vocal transition, but then also like I know you and we talk about this kind of stuff. Like we get coffee. Yeah. And this is what we talk about. And our
topics
dogs.
Of choice.
And our dogs. But I think a lot of clinicians can't have that conversation. So having a patient see a community coach, you know, connecting with like some program like Nicole's where they're going to get to talk to like they get a membership-based community, or even like doing like their research in Discord, or sending them to a traditional SLP, particularly if they have insurance coverage and things like that. You know, to get that really set realistic expectations for them about what they can get out of surgery and what they can't.
I have many members join my program as they're like, oh, I'm thinking of getting vocal fold surgery. I've tried a whole bunch of things. Nothing's worked for me so far. I'm going to do this as a last ditch. And most of them, if they're coming to me, that they don't end up getting vocal fold surgery. Like there's the voice is manipulable to a very large degree, often within to the degree of which you can find your ideal sound with behavioral changes. And like by behavioral changes, I mean manipulating the different parts of your vocal tract. Also behavioral changes are required for that. But I also have a lot of people who are in my program who undergo vocal fold surgery. And so they're doing it in tandem. Yeah. And I would definitely recommend, like you're saying, vocal fold surgery is not the first point. It's not the first touch point. It's often the 5th, 6th, or 7th touch point.
And I always, like I say, if I can, you know, if the patient's willing and interested, getting that prehab visit with someone or a prehab coaching session with someone who really understands all of those components of voice so that patient can be prepped is really good. I think the other thing for referring clinicians to know is how much vocal rest is required after surgery, because your patients will want to know that. And go.
I don't speak to that very often because I don't, I think you should follow what your surgeon says. Typically it's like anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks of like not speaking. And then there's reintegrating your voice. Reintegration of the voice also is typically led by the vocal surgeon in terms of they have their protocols, or they have a specific speech language pathologist that works within their practice or that they refer to that helps reintegrate the voice. And so when I have individuals who are asking me about, you know, getting back into the curriculum that I'm doing, I always say, you can talk to me and resume your practice when you are at the point where you are fully allowed to speak 100% of the day. Then we can continue our work, because it is it's quite an impactful surgery. So it is very fragile afterwards, definitely.
Right. And that's so useful that's a really, like, again, for like clinicians who are listening, these are referring providers, are usually hormone prescribers. Like, so knowing these kinds of pieces of information are such important clinical pearls that they will get to like pass on to their patients. Yeah. Which is really going to make it easier for their patients to like plan their lives. Like if getting vocal surgery is something they really, really want and it's really important for them, that's fabulous. Let's help them get that. But let's help them get it in a way that isn't going to like, they're going to be like horribly disappointed and upset and traumatized because they didn't realize they weren't going to be able to speak for 4 to 8 weeks and they have a job as radio DJ. And now they're out of work for 2 months. So,
and once the voice has healed and has healed enough to where they're able to use their voice again, often, I had this exact discussion with somebody today, one of my members today. They were telling me about their experience post vocal fold surgery of really feeling depressed, dysphoric, because the voice they thought was botched, because the voice sounds different for a period of time before it settles. And so there is also a period of maybe, feeling like the results aren't what you wanted, or getting misgendered, especially on the phone where there's no visual feedback for nothing else. So it is something to think about. But
so well, we've talked about surgery a ton. We can move on. So other kind of
resources
that you tend to recommend.
Honestly, I'm going to talk about like what I will offer, and it's a really easy first step, especially if you're a clinician or if you're a physician trying to refer out and you just don't feel confident in talking about resources. I offer free 15-minute consult calls to anybody who is at all interested in navigating the resources. There's no pressure, there's no commitment. It is just a conversation. And that conversation with that individual, I talk about their previous experience, if they have any, with voice work, what their goals are for their voice, because I don't assume binary stereotypical.
I like this.
Consolidated that. Any cultural expectations of what their goals are. So we talk about what their experience is, what their goals are, what their timeline is, if they're prioritizing it right now, what's their budget, and then I help navigate with them what resource or program would best fit all of those areas. At first, it was either me or disseminating them to, it was very frustrating because there wasn't a lot. At this point in my business, I have something at every price point. I have scholarships. I've not yet met a person who I have a consult with that I can't help in some way, even if it's through this huge bevy of free resources that I have. So if you have somebody who is interested in voice transition and they feel comfortable talking to me, it can also just be through email if they don't want to do a Zoom chat, or they can keep their camera off, whatever is most affirming and comfortable. Feel free to shoot them my way. They can email me, or they can just go to undeadvoice.com/contact, and I have a link to my calendar to schedule those.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
And you also have a really fun quiz on your website
that
people can do as well, that can help them just start that resource search journey as well.
So that quiz will help you figure out what I provide, from free to really low cost to a full voice transition comprehensive program with coaching and courses and community platforms. They can see all of the resources that I have, and based on their answers, it helps filter them towards the best program for them. And so you can find that one at undeadvoice.com/video-ask.
Right. And of course, for a lot of our listeners, they're going to just be listening on audio, but we do have a video version that's available. So I'm going to pop this onto our screen. This is Nicole's website, Undead Voice. Yes. And then there's the contact. This is the contact form Nicole is talking about. And then the quiz, you can find the buttons down at the footer always as well.
Or that little pop-up in the corner is the quiz if you want to take it in they can take it right in the web browser.
And then since we are talking about resources, we're going to circle back and talk a little bit more about your program and how it works and what it includes. But I'm going to show clinicians some of the other resources I use really frequently. If you have any experience or tips to share with them, I would love to hear that. So your lesson, founded by a community member with lived experience, and includes a lot of peer coaches, so other trans people who have lived experience as well.
I believe the founder is actually left and sold their company, and now has their own is just doing individual lessons, and sold their company to one of the previous employees.
Okay.
I think that's right.
So many new updates for me.
So many
I
changes.
Found out. Yet also their website looks redesigned from the last time I saw it. So definitely. But you can see their trans voice, and I think they used to at least do individual coaching with a peer or community coach, and then also more affordable group sessions, which one, help with cost, but two, also give you more practice partners potentially, which is a really important part of vocal transition. So that's one of the resources we look at sometimes. And then
Seattle Voice Lab. Do you do Seattle Voice Lab?
I have also, yes, have some of my patients use Seattle Voice Lab.
Claire is great.
And then, so that's this one. So tell us a little bit about Claire, because I don't know as much about this person.
Claire is also a community coach, so a coach of lived experience, but has a really big background in singing, really extensive background in singing, has a really transformative, like impactful stories. So if you're interested, you should read more on her About page. Specializes mostly in, well, her website is more geared towards like trans feminine voices, but works with the entire spectrum of gender presentation as well around voice, and does one-on-one lessons that are over a few weeks instead of more months. And you kind of continue. It doesn't, like that type of progress in a voice typically doesn't happen in a few weeks, but it gives you the education that you can then continue on.
Awesome.
Shifting your voice in the future.
And then
and they have some employees, and right now they're full, but they have a wait list.
Awesome. Fabulous. And then also there are a couple apps for people who want like a little app-based experience or a little starting point. Nicole's like, no, but I will say some of my patients have like used like Christella and Eva, and Nicole has some opinions about those, but those are app-based vocal transition research.
I think everybody should do whatever works best for them. But when I was speaking earlier about traditional techniques that are mainly focused around vocal rehab, those are the techniques taught in those apps.
Oh,
and so
really
they don't address resonance in the way that actually impacts gender perception.
Okay.
They actually tend to do the opposite.
That's really useful information to have. And so Christella and Eva are both created, I believe, by speech language pathologists without lived experience. And so they're not incorporating any of these community techniques.
No, they're using mainly this idea of like resonate, like where do you feel vibrations, whether they're in your chest, your throat, or your face. And that is not it's not a very valid technique for gender perception of the voice.
There we go. And then let's see, what are some of the other, I feel like
Renee Yaxon, if you've heard of Renee Yaxon. So if you go to reneeyaxon.com, they are a non-binary individual of lived experience, also have some voice background, not a speech language pathologist. They're Canadian based. They are YOXON, Yaxon.
Wow.
Sorry.
That's okay. YOXON.
Yep. Yeah. They have a lot of really great resources and many courses too. Their program is awesome. Highly recommend.
I love this. Oh my gosh, so many great resources. Is there anyone else that topped your list, or any other resources that top your list?
No, honestly, Seattle Voice Lab and Renee Yaxon are the two that are most vetted and are phenomenal, and that I highly, highly recommend. Not only looking at their work, but hearing people have experience with them.
Fabulous. I love
out of all the ones you shared, the people who've had experience with those two speak highest of them. Yeah.
Love this. That is fabulous to know. We already brought up the apps. And then there's a ton of folks on YouTube. There's a ton of resources and Reddit for people as well, for people who love to fall in the Reddit hole. And then I think there is a referral to a traditional speech language pathologist. Like we do have Sandy Hirsch here in Seattle, who is like, you know, very experienced in the realm of gender voice work. And, you know, there's like, just like the speech language pathologist that works at your clinic system, like Providence or Swedish or whatever, and I know we've spent a lot of time talking about like why maybe the traditional medical model isn't like a great fit for everyone, or maybe isn't a great fit most of the time. But when is it a good fit? Like when is it a really good time to like actually, because as clinicians, right, as referring clinicians, our job is actually to offer our patients all of the options like we know about, and kind of give them a little summary of this is a good fit for this, this is less good fit for this, and then let them decide what works best for them. So when kind of does it seem like a good idea to use a traditional model? It's
a good idea to use a traditional model if, I think always having the caveat of it's not going to be comprehensive. Likely. So speech language pathologists, traditional speech language pathologists are really good for pitch work, for vocal health, and for like intonation and emphasis. Resonance is the place where the things that you might want to supplement are resonance work. And then a big part of learning to transition your voice is having a model, right? So if that individual has not done voice transition work on their own voice and cannot demonstrate not just the end result, but the progress of getting there, so the sound shifting from one thing to the end result, it's going to be really difficult for the client to form like a new habits, if you will. So But it is honestly, if somebody is like, I can't afford nothing, I really just want whatever my health insurance will cover, and their health insurance by some miracle will cover a speech language pathologist, and that person says that they have training, go ahead and send them, and then maybe let them know that there are supplemental resources that might be useful, and maybe in a few years speech language pathologists will be comprehensive enough, maybe in 5 years, maybe in 1,000 years, who knows. But letting them know about all the resources, including traditional SLP, and then that there might be some other resources they want to check out as well.
Right. So definitely like a good client to refer is someone who does have insurance access and coverage, because the out-of-pocket cost can be really hard, and who is interested in maybe, using those benefits. Also, I think I've heard it, like anyone who actually does have a vocal pathology, right, or a vocal disorder, having them, even if they are going to access community resources as well, having them work with someone who can support them through transitioning the like pathology part of their vocal transition is going to be important, I think, as well.
100%. I think community coaches really benefit from knowing when to refer to a speech language pathologist. And from what I've seen, the one Seattle Voice Lab and Renee Yaxon are very good at having awareness and verbiage around that is outside of my scope. You should see a speech language pathologist. And so as well, like I am a speech language pathologist, so my program incorporates a whole course on vocal health and foundational work. There's a specific lesson in how to recognize the difference between effort and tension in your body and in your voice, which is super important because, well, backing up, like you said, there's some statistics out there that say 30% of people who come to a gender affirming voice transition as something they'd like to explore come with a pre-existing voice disorder. Either something that they've just have, functionally, or from having tried to do their own work before on their voice. Yeah.
Well, that's phenomenal. So it's like the range of options, like we've gone over, just to like recap for our referring clinicians, is surgery, referral to a speech linguist pathologist working in a medical model. These community resources, which we'll list one more time for you, are Undead Voice, Seattle Voice Lab, and Renee Yaxon. And then Yaxon. I'm just gonna fumble that. I'm very sorry, Renee. I will work on it, and I will check out your website later. I'm very excited. And then YouTube, Reddit, some apps that maybe are more like working with a traditional speech language pathologist are all options that you can offer your patients. And I think maybe the letting your patient pick is always, patient-centered care is super phenomenal. And couching it in the terms of, whichever option you pick, if you have the time and energy to look at some of these other resources, it's going to just like give you more tools to approach this with. And I think like your website, Renee's website, and Seattle Voice Lab website, it sounds like those are going to be really great resources where someone doesn't necessarily have to go and dig through YouTube or Reddit and find 7 videos that maybe aren't quite what we would want, or maybe not quite the quality they're looking for to find like the one. It sounds like y'all are going to have that kind of stuff just packaged on your site, which is going to be fabulous.
And I'm launching like a library of resources, one of which is a blog. And one of the blog posts of the first one is the questions to ask your speech pathologist to make sure that they are qualified to do the work. And so that would probably be a great resource, because I get asked that often. They're like, I've worked with a speech pathologist before and I didn't have great results. Why would I expect to have a different experience with you? And I'm like, I completely understand. I completely understand. Here are the great things to know about any coach, not just a speech pathologist. There's like a list of things that you would want to check before deciding to go with them. And I think it can be difficult because there's also often like a health halo around specialists that are referred to, that there's an assumption that they are going to be comprehensive enough and be able to provide all of the care that you need. And then when an individual goes through that process and maybe doesn't end up with a voice that is affirming for them, or that communicates their unique individual choice of how they would like to sound, then they feel as a failure, not the system. So that's something to really keep in mind.
Yes. Very often it is your providers letting you down, for any community members who are listening, for sure. And so we've kind of gone over, like, we've spent a lot of time together. I honestly am doing a bad job of keeping track of time. So
you want to talk about my program? Is that what we're doing
That is
now?
what I want to go to next. Exactly. You knew where I was headed.
Sure.
We've gotten to hear all about Nicole's journey and experience, and some of the process they went through, and then we talked about kind of general resources and when to refer. But yeah, let's definitely talk more about what you do, because it's a phenomenal option for people.
Thank you. Yeah. So the main roadblocks that I was trying to remove whenever I moved away from the traditional medical model and created Undead Voice, my company, was increasing access, giving the individual agency over their voice transition, and also making sure that it was affordable. So I have an online gender voice transition program called Undead Voice Lab. It's a comprehensive voice transition program that has 3 main pieces to it. There's online courses that cover every aspect of a gender voice transition. There's 9 different courses in total. There is live coaching with me twice a month, as well as a coaching platform where individuals can access me 24/7. My phone is like attached to my hand to send me clips for feedback asynchronously, or ask me questions, or ask the community questions. And then there's a really heavy emphasis on community. So I give individuals the option to join small practice groups that meet every week to use their transitioning voice in like a really fun way. And then I have specialists come in and give workshops on things like voice acting or singing, or how to combat dysphoria. We even have like a hypno voice coach that comes in and talks about different strategies that you can use whenever you're feeling dysphoric when practicing or using your voice in public. So it's really super comprehensive program. The main time that a member spends in my program is within the curriculum. So I've created a first of its kind, probably the only one that actually exists, literal curriculum for an individual to go through to fully transition their voice. And the framework that I've used goes through the model of creating new neuronal pathways. So actually habitually changing a voice or expanding the range, so that at the end of my program, a member ends up with a natural, sustainable, effortless voice. And by effortless, I mean both mentally and physically. So it doesn't feel tense or like a struggle to create the sounds, and also they're not having to think about their voice when they open their mouth to speak. It comes out.
Right. It's like the goal is just like comfort, right?
Yeah.
Which is exactly what we all want in our experience of our bodies. I think that's like such a huge part of the journey of transition, and it's such a huge part of the journey of life, right? Just to find like comfort and ease within ourselves, and to have that come with a voice that you've completely changed in the course of like, a few months to a few years is like such a huge goal and such a phenomenal thing to be able to access.
Yeah. I would say, so a lot of individuals who I work with have maybe gone through other resources before and have found a voice that they enjoy or that they really love and they identify with, but have a difficult time maintaining it if they feel emotional or angry, or maybe they've brightened their voice, but they're feeling dark emotions, or vice versa. And it's hard to maintain. So when I say sustainable, I don't just mean the entire day. Of course, that is a goal, but also in every environment, in every emotion, in every instance, whether you're sneezing or coughing, that you're not having to think about the voice, but it just maintains as a habit. And I think that is probably one of the main differentiating factors of my program, because most other resources teach imitation. So imitate the sound, which is, like I mentioned, find a voice that you love, but you're always having to think about it. You're always having to be on, and it's not unconscious. It's very much something that you're thinking about until years and years have passed.
Yes.
Yeah. Affordability wise, like we talked about earlier with paying out of pocket for weekly voice lessons can be anywhere from $15,000 to $30,000. My program is a one-time tuition of $2,000. And that can be paid all at once, or it can be split up into monthly payment plan of $212 a month. So for comparison, instead of $200 a week, it ends up being closer to $39 a week. So again, cheaper than the typical copay. And the length of time it takes, my program is about 9 months of curriculum. And most people find the majority of the big change in their voice happens within the first 6 months.
Okay. And I think always affordability is like such an interesting word, right? Because like it just like
what is affordable
or masculinity, it like varies by the person and the culture and all of that good things. But obviously like significantly different price point, right? Than from $30,000 to $2,000. I know
Even that can feel unapproachable though for people.
For
Like
sure.
absolutely.
For some clients, yeah, and for some patients, that's going to feel totally inaccessible. But for some people, it's going to be super accessible. What are some of your resources for patients who that's not going to be accessible for?
Yeah, definitely. I award about $60,000 a year in partial and full scholarships that are needs-based. And so you get those just by having a consult with me, having a conversation. It's an honor system. If you're like, I can't afford this, we talk about what you can afford.
Did you say 60,000 as in 60?
Yeah.
That's many zeros. I'm just going to shout that out. So our referring providers hear the number of zeros. Because I was like, oh, I definitely heard you wrong. It's definitely 6,000 is what you said.
That would only be 3 people. We want I want much more than that. Yeah, I think I created my company in a way that is very scalable. So it does cost me to give scholarships in terms of my time and energy, but that I have an abundance. I'm much more focused on increasing accessibility. That's like the number one goal of mine, especially for the next few years. And along those lines, so there's scholarship programs. I also have cheaper, like you don't have to pay for the entire program. You can just do an intro course or a short course. So there's lower tiered options that are as cheap as like $79 or $200 for a full intro course. So they're definitely more affordable. And then I'm partnering with different states and federal agencies, community-based organizations, philanthropic organizations, employers, so small to large companies, to have them source funds and reimburse for the program. So often if somebody is referred to me and they work for a company that's affirming, I just get in touch with that company's HR and talk to them about reimbursing for this missing piece. I've also chatted with a lot of large companies. For example, in Oregon, if somebody lives within the counties in and around Portland, I am an approved vendor that you can get the full voice transition program for free. If you
that's amazing.
If you are a member of Oregon Cares.
Portland, Oregon. Did you hear that?
Portland, Oregon.
In your area. Amazing.
If you have Care Oregon.
You should be telling all of your patients about this.
Yeah.
In that area, even if they don't want it, because they can just have the resources for free. And then when people purchase your curriculum, and so they pay the full $2,000, how long do they have access to it for?
It is lifetime access. It used to just be a year, but if my vision and my mission is really increasing access, 1 year just creates a longer form version of that, like pressurized, I'm not taking advantage of this program thing. And it's, I think, a little ridiculous to expect somebody's voice and their identity to not maybe shift or solidify within a year. So the access to the courses, all current and future courses, is lifetime access if you join my program. What does expire is your tuition buys you a year's worth of coaching with me, which is a lot. And community access. So if a year passes and somebody still needs some support, they can just pay for as they use it. So if they just want to pop in for a month, let's say 3 years have passed and they want a little refresher, they can just pop in for a month, and then it's just $99 for the month.
Phenomenal.
To get all the coaching.
That's amazing. Yeah. Okay. So lifetime access to the curriculum and content. So there isn't necessarily that, like, I didn't do my homework this week, or I didn't do my homework this month. Component has been just like completely removed, which again, for like, that's like fucking huge. Like that, I mean, right? Because that is like, this work is so vulnerable and so raw, and like we're so exposed when we're doing these kinds of things, like, because not only are we trying to like find our voice, like some of us are trying to find ourselves. And so like to have all of that process going on inside of us, with all of the chronic minority stress that is happening with every interaction that we have with the world, and then layer on top of that, like, oh, and I didn't do my speech homework that I just spent like $200 on, it's just like an unnecessary stressor, completely removed. I love
Maybe
that.
Relevant to say here, a lot of resources, like especially when I was doing the more traditional medical model, I would say, it would be great if you could sit down to 30 minutes to an hour and practice X, Y, and Z. That is completely reimagined in my program. So in terms of the time commitment, because it can feel like that's a really big deciding factor for individuals. Maybe they have the monetary resources and they have the internal motivation and the accountability, but they're just worried about fitting it into their schedule. What I did in Undead Voice Lab is it's super supported. So every week there's a checklist of exercises of what you should be doing, when you should be doing them, how many times. So you never have a question of what you should be focused on. And the time commitment is all I ask from you in terms of set aside time is 5 minutes somewhere in the first half of your day to do a vocal warm up. And then outside of that, 10 1-minute periods throughout the day that are incorporated. All of the exercises are designed to be incorporated into your daily routine. So like 2 minutes in the shower, a minute when you're making breakfast, a minute when you're walking the dog. And that's actually research backed as the most effective way to change something as internalized as a voice is small, frequent bursts of practice.
That's a phenomenal approach.
To your point earlier of agency, I'd say that there's 3 main pillars to the way that I've kind of designed my program: the access, agency, and affordability. Agency specifically is something that I would love to like take 4 seconds and talk about.
Yeah.
So in terms of agency, what I'm meaning when I say I'm giving the individual agency over their voice is that like the Undead Voice Lab framework teaches full control over the vocal spectrum. So I focus on every individual part of a voice transition so that you end up with more of like a soundboard of individual knobs and sliders that you can play around with and combine to create the sound that most aligns with your unique individual identity. And this is way different than any other approach that I've seen. Typically, mainly because it's not pigeonholing you into any specific stereotype or like binary ideal of what a cultural expectation of a femme or a masc voice is.
Right.
As well as it enables you, by expanding your range, it enables you to just create, say this is how you're speaking now. For those who are just listening, I have my hand up. And so this is maybe a baseline voice. It enables you to create a whole new home base that you can access both equally easily. You can just kind of choose in case you're not yet in a position in life where you're comfortable using a transition sound, you still have access to your baseline voice.
Both.
Yeah. And so they're both comfortable. It's just whichever one you use more is going to be most habitual, but they're both equally accessible. And that's, I'd say, like the main feedback I'm getting in the program. Well, I had 100 beta users go through the program before I ever put it live and met with them every single week to ask for feedback. And that was one of the biggest changes.
And you've had like over 700 people go through your program now. So
and right now there's like, I think today I looked, there's 253 active members today on the program that are like, have logged in today. So I mean, definitely tried and true. And then in terms of like my free resources, I have like, I don't want to talk about my follower account or anything, but I've touched tens and tens of thousands of people. Just
Nicole's famous on TikTok, everyone.
Oh my God. So
go find them there.
Yeah. So that's a really good point, is like free resource wise, I put out a longer form, like under 5 minutes, but longer than 10 seconds on TikTok video every Tuesday on my YouTube channel. You can find it in Undead Voice. And those are not like teasers or ads. They are like really intentional, performable exercises that you can actually make some good progress towards a voice transition if you aren't able to, afford a full structured program. And so YouTube, every Tuesday I put videos out. I have a free Facebook group online that is private. That one's called Gender Voice Tips. And then I have a Facebook page that I put videos out every week. And on TikTok, I'm posting almost every day. And they're all really educational, free, actionable tips.
Fabulous. And all of Nicole's social and handles and website will be available, on our website. You teach like a full range and people get to pick and choose. So like a lot of times if a patient was going to see a traditional speech language pathologist, right, they've been referred, they're still going to be pigeonholed by that provider as like trying to achieve a feminine sound or trying to achieve a masculine sound. And they're not necessarily going to go through like a full set of exercises or techniques or tips that will let you like actually experiment, as Nicole was saying, with all of these different components of voice and then customize the voice that fits your identity. And as like Nicole and I both know, gender is a social construct and there's more than two options.
Yeah, that's a whole, like, there's so many, within my program, there's so many experiences that I have people do. Like I have them go through vocal influencers. So listen to voices that they admire in the world, put adjectives down of what is brought to mind when they hear those voices, look for similarities between those. And I've been asked often, like, can you make me sound like Scarlett Johansson? I'm like, no, we don't do that. But I will give you their vocal recipe. I'll give you Scarlett Johansson's vocal recipe. Once you've learned the techniques, you can try that on for yourself and see if it actually aligns with your identity. If it does, wonderful, you now sound like Scarlett Johansson. But if not, then you sound like you, right? And then I have people like explore the influences that have existed on their voice. So cultural, environmental, and physical influences that currently exist in their voice, identify what about that voice they love and want to take it forward into their voice transition and what they would like to leave behind them, down to the point of like, I have my dad's dry wit and humor. I have my mom's like assertiveness, and those show up in my voice through X, Y, and Z. And so with that exercise, I then take their answers and translate it into a vocal recipe. Like, well, so you should have a brightness ladder of 7, and you want thin folds with like, so actual, goals for their voice. But do you want me to show you some voice stuff?
Yeah, we can definitely do that. Reflectively, like, I feel like it would be such a unique and fun opportunity for any clinician who is thinking about, whether they're gender diverse or not, like, who just works with our community, like, to go through some of your coursework and some of your options. Because even like you were saying, voice is a place where we can explore gender expression without, significant risk to like permanent physical changes in our body. And as clinicians, I think, one of the things that makes us better clinicians is experiencing what our patients experience when that's a possibility. Yeah. And so like voice work is such a phenomenally perfect opportunity for that. So not that I'm asking all the clinicians here to buy your course, but maybe think about doing some of the stuff. It would be good.
No, it's a well-placed plug. I'm creating a clinician education intro course.
I didn't even know that. We did not, literally did not talk about this beforehand, y'all.
We have not, no, but it'll be a basic, like really quick, really digestible, but vast overview of all of the areas of gender voice transition with some fun exercises to see what it feels like to transition your own voice or shift and explore what your voice can do. So you have a better idea of what you're referring out towards, or just feel like you have knowledge around the physiology and anatomy of the voice as it pertains to gender shifting.
That's going to be amazing. I cannot wait for that to be up and available for people.
On the page with this podcast is, I'll give you a link to, they can sign up for the wait list to be notified when it happens.
Perfect. That'll be great. Yeah. I feel like, I feel like, again, like the whole purpose behind what I do, right, is like bringing lived experience to this work. And I've never medically transitioned. I want to obviously not confuse anyone or like claim a title that is not mine by any means. I'm gender diverse, but never felt like medical transition was something that fit for me. I have multiple partners who have, and so I've just been part of that journey with people in a really intimate way that is very different than being like the clinician that sees them once every 3 months, right? Yeah. And so I have like really intimate knowledge of voice transition because I've been part of people's transitional journeys there. And that makes me a better clinician, but like taking this course would make me an even better clinician. So I'm gonna sign up.
Okay. Yay. Okay, great.
Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, I think generally speaking, there are, now this is obviously going to be based on my curriculum, not on what is typically offered, because there's a few areas that I touch on that I've not seen before. So take this with a huge boulder of salt, that what I'm demonstrating and talking about areas of focus, they're specifically related to my curriculum. And I am not at all assuming that every program is like this. I don't want to give false advertising out there. The kind of journey that somebody goes through with my program, first, as I mentioned earlier, is there's a whole 3-week course on vocal foundations. So we talk about like vocal health, what makes sure that you have a really safe and effective foundation for your voice to work on, things like how to eliminate throat clearing, how to make sure that you're hydrated, things that cause reflux, managing that reflux, all of the kind of more speech pathology scope of vocal health, as well as reducing tension in your body and in your voice. And then, like I mentioned, how to recognize the difference between effort and tension so that you're not doing anything damaging to your voice as you start to do things that are more performative. And that is the first course. The second area that I focus on is something called vocal weight. And so the easiest way to understand this is like adding or removing bass from your tone. Essentially, it's when the vocal folds come together to vibrate, they can do so at different thicknesses. So the whole vocal fold can come together and vibrate, E, which sounds kind of, you know, like a, a thick bassy tone, E, or they can thin that out and just the top edge of the vocal folds can touch, but there's still a clear tone. So that sounds like E. So it's a little thinner of a sound. To switch from one to the other, that goes from E.
Oh yeah, I can hear that. Like, yeah.
Can you? It's kind of a. I have not warmed my voice up, so we're just going cold here. This is also where we talk about things like vocal fry, like having a little bit of fry in the voice. So this is low energy, and it's not something that is typically recommended for an entire voice, but it's often something that's kind of added in as a feature onto the voice. And then as well as like breathiness in the voice. So this is more of like a Marilyn Monroe voice.
I'm not at all a big fan.
Of that sound. Yeah, there's some that are more aesthetically pleasing. Often we mix them together. So like my voice, for example, is a thinner version of thick folds with some fry towards the end. I don't typically usually go breathy at all.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
It's just not my vibe. But
I love a Maryland voice. I'm like, wait, what is my voice? I'm putting you on the spot. How do
you have thick folds with a little bit of fry.
There we go. Now I know something that I never knew.
Your fry is usually at the end of your sentences on words that start with vowels.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. The next technique or exercise is something that I've titled vocal tilt, which is essentially a spectrum from, if you had to put things at the end, adjectives, it would be assertive and sweet. So I'm going to do the days of the week with no tilt in my voice, and then I'm going to do the days of the week with tilt in my voice.
Okay.
So no tilt would be like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. This is very much my voice. It's just pretty neutral. And then with tilt, I would, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So this is most everything else about my voice is the same. I've just added a little bit of tilt on top of it. It can add a little bit of sweetness.
Yeah.
This is maybe the middle of that spectrum. If I go all the way to the other end, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. This is that like, oh no, did you hurt yourself? It'll be okay. It's kind of that like sicky sweet voice.
Yeah. This is the like talking to the pets or the kids.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then the next, so you have,
and when you're actually very specifically, I think you brought up earlier how you want people to have like sustainability and comfort and ease accessing their voice in every emotional environment.
Yes.
Talking to animals and kids is one of the most common areas I hear my clients like have stress and dysphoria around, right? Particularly people who want a deeper, darker sound. They're like, as soon as I have to like interact with the animals, like, you know, I'm having huge dysphoria. And so that is an example for our listeners of exactly what Nicole was saying is a goal. And back to
typically what happens there is if they've transitioned their entire voice as one piece, like they've shifted the whole thing just up or the whole thing just down, they don't have individualized control. So when they start talking to a kid, the whole thing shifts up like an elevator instead of just one of the knobs turning. Right? So vocal tilt is going to be your on and off for, let's say, talking to a kid. So say you've masculinized, I'm doing air quotes if you can't see. if you've darkened, deepened, and lowered your voice, but now you're talking to a child instead or a pet, and you want to be a little bit more open, and I'm shaking my shoulders if you can't see that either.
Right.
The best thing to do is just turn on tilt. So just add a little bit of tilt. But often what happens if you've not trained your voice in this way is that all your brightness goes up, your resonance goes up, your pitch goes up, your vocal folds thin out, everything goes. So you go from E. So if you go from here, like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, instead of just, oh, are you okay? Oh, hello, little puppy. You go to, oh, are you okay? Hello, little puppy. It's like a full shift up.
Yes. That was a very good demonstration. I've never heard you do that before.
Oh yeah. Well, my ideal tone is a little bit more like dark and sultry, like still like kind of questionable, but like it's anyway, I have a lot of practice going to the darker, deeper, lower part of my voice, as well as the higher and brighter piece.
And where is that assertive tilt?
Assertive. Okay. So say that you have moved towards a brighter, more lighter and higher version of the voice. So if I do that to my own, it would be E. So maybe I'm up here, like in a little bit of a higher, brighter space, and I'm nice and sweet, but I need to be assertive. I would tilt, like right now I have tilt in my voice. If I turn it off, I don't understand why you think that's okay to do. It's absolutely not acceptable. If you don't stop doing that, we're going to go to the car and go home. Exactly.
It's the parent voice.
I refer to it as like mom in church. If you don't stop, there's going to be consequences when we get in the car.
Yeah.
So it's still high and bright, but I've taken the tilt out of it. So now I can sound, let's say I'm presenting at work. I want to sound a little bit more assertive and intentional. You can just take the tilt out, but keep everything up nice and bright and still have an affirming sound if that's what you're going for. So turning these little knobs on and off, as opposed to, this is like my conversational voice. And if I need to get assertive, I'm going to drop down here and talk to you.
Right. Yeah.
You don't want that drastic shift to happen.
Yeah, that's a huge shift and like a very different sound.
And then the next 2 courses are focused on our favorite, most impactful piece, which is resonance. So there is a 4-week course on how to change the lip position that you're using to shift the resonance of your voice, either brighter or darker. And then there is a 10-week course on your larynx. And your larynx is, well, medical professionals probably know, AKA your thyroid. It's also called your voice box, your thyroid cartilage. I'm going to show you lip change. So I'll go from bright to dark and then dark to bright with just shifting my lips. So this is resonance, not pitch. My pitch will stay the exact same. So that sounds like E.
Whoa.
So that's bright to dark. Just changing my resonance with my lips. And then from dark to bright would be E.
Yeah.
So to demo like what speech sounds like, it would be E Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. This is with bright lip resonance. And then E Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Wow.
So the pitch is relatively the same. I'm just shifting my resonance filter.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, I'm like moving my mouth now and no one can see this. If they're just listening. But for our listeners who don't have video access, Nicole's mouth positions were very different while they were doing those different demonstrations. Yeah.
The bright end of the spectrum is a maniacal grin, and the dark end of the spectrum is like a pursed kissy mouth.
There you go.
Or, yes. And then the larynx core. So lips are great for shifting resonance, but they're usually better for subtle changes because I think often it can feel wild to be speaking with like a full maniacal grin. Let's say you're feeling frustrated and you're smiling. That doesn't really check out. So the larynx is probably the most reliable place to find resonance shifts. And I'm going to hold out a single pitch, a single note, and just shift my resonance. I'll go from neutral to dark to neutral to bright.
Okay.
For those who are on video, you can watch my finger and see where I'm at, but you should be able to hear it pretty well as well. So it would be E. Could you hear it?
Yeah, you dropped a little bit in the higher ranges. Like there's just a little softer pickup on your mic, but you can still hear. Yeah.
High frequency sounds love to be muted. Mics hate high frequency sounds. But speaking in those areas, so a more neutral. Yeah.
Let's just shout that out.
Yes. So a more the compression of frequencies for microphones is misogyny. I love it.
Pretty sure.
For sure. Pretty sure. Yeah. My partner, who is a sound designer, would say actually it compresses the upper and lower frequencies. But we don't know that. We didn't say that.
So I feel like in medicine, the answer is always going to be like, okay, cancer.
Yeah.
Syphilis.
Yeah.
Racism, misogyny. Like any health condition, like any symptom you have can be caused by any 4 of these things.
Cancer,
like no matter
syphilis,
what it
racism,
is.
Misogyny.
Yeah.
Cancer, syphilis, racism, misogyny. I'm going to WebMD myself and it'll just be those 4. Create like a fake WebMD website. Okay, now I'm going to have you do something for me. So I'm going to have you shift your larynx. I just want you to put your hand on your throat. So touch your thyroid cartilage. Mm-hmm. And I want you to swallow.
Mm-hmm.
Can you feel it go up and down?
I did feel it go up and down.
Awesome. Now yawn. Feel it go down and up?
Yeah.
So that's just general movement of the larynx.
Okay.
Those exercises should never be used for anything but just noticing that the larynx can move.
That it moves.
Whenever it comes to actually using your voice and moving your larynx, can you give me try to imitate like dopey dog. I'm a dopey dog.
Dopey dog. I'm a dopey dog.
You're here, dopey dog. Can you go, dopey dog?
Dopey dog.
Yeah,
Dopey
so you're a
dog.
little bit tight in the jaw. Can you think open and wide and hollow? Dopey
Dopey dog.
Yeah.
Dog.
To be fair to you, I'm also showing you things from 6 months into a voice transition program instead of like, if you had gone through my program, the first month would have been reducing all of that tension. It would not exist. And these things would feel much more accessible to you.
I'm essentially an experimental concept.
Yeah.
It's totally fine. Also, I will say Deeper and Darker is like a place that's really hard for me to access as like someone who like presents high fin all of the time. It's just always like
it's all about experience, right? So essentially with all voice training, we are creating new motor speech plans so that the muscles that are responsible for raising and lowering your larynx can, one, get stronger, and two, more used to being accessed.
Right.
Like you lower your larynx all the time. You yawn all day long. You lower your larynx whenever you weight lift and hold your breath. Like there's a lot of things you're doing in life to lower your larynx. You just haven't attached it to speech. So as soon as you activate the speech parts of your frontal and parietal lobes, then you start to bring in we lose access to some of the just reflexive things that we're doing with our bodies and our voices, which is maybe something to mention. My specialty as a speech pathologist going through school and where I did the hospital work is actually in stroke and traumatic brain injury recovery. So my main job was teaching adult brains how to learn to speak again.
Yeah.
So the gender voice work that I do is through the lens of teaching adult brains how to reprogram motor speech plans. So it's
a good fit.
Yeah, they have a weird synergy with one another.
Right? Yeah.
Okay, now we're on a tangent again. So after resonance, we do talk about pitch. There's a reason it's after resonance because it is absolutely not more important than pitch. But if you don't touch your pitch and you brighten your resonance significantly, and there's quite a delta between the two, it can start to sound unnatural. For example, if I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so I'm a little bit lower in my pitch, and then if I put like a bright resonance on top of like a lower pitch.
Yeah.
Or if I talk with like a little bit of a lower pitch with a bright resonance on top of it, it just doesn't sound like a voice you would hear in the world.
Yeah. Sounds a little off.
Yeah, so that delta, if it's too big, can feel a little bit unnatural. So we do want to keep them relatively close to one another. Within, there's a lot of wiggle room there. But for pitch, even if you don't want to shift the pitch of your voice, the pitch course helps you solidify the range that you're using now, because often, especially if you have been exposed to testosterone, like if your voice is shifting through being exposed to testosterone, there's a lot of instability in your pitch as the changes happen within your vocal tract. And so there can be breaks. It can feel like really unpredictable, volatile. What the voice that comes out is different from like time to time, hour to hour, even. So focusing on strengthening the muscles responsible for controlling the pitch does a lot towards making that a reliable sound that's coming out.
Nice.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important component. I think I hosted like a journal club for providers, and we did a lot of learning on speech language pathology. And I think so many of the community providers were unaware that referring someone for vocal transition or vocal coaching or vocal support for people who were taking testosterone is actually really beneficial for them.
Oh yeah.
It's all of the same applications that we talked about with surgery, right? Testosterone changes one component of your vocal presentation, and it changes it, and you don't have any of this muscle memory that you've been talking about over and over again about training into people, right? You don't have muscle memory that worked with those vocal cords for your entire life. So
yeah, and like you mentioned, testosterone changes pitch, but it'll have a bit of an effect on resonance. Sometimes it will lengthen or widen the vocal tract. It'll make it a little bit bigger, but none of to your point, none of that is chosen. It's all happening, and so there's a lack of control within those vocal parameters, and it can take years for those things to kind of settle. And you want to feel confident in your voice outside of that time frame. Right. And then vocal weight, vocal tilt, dynamics, projection, sustainability, all of that is not affected at all by testosterone. I'm going to go super quick through the last 3 areas because
do it.
Super fun. Dynamics, I have a whole course on dynamics. Dynamics is not just your intonation, like how you emphasize things. It's also the length of phrase that you use. It's how you elongate different syllables, different vowel sounds. It's how you choose to emphasize specific words in sentences. So there's 5 main areas within dynamics. Those are really interesting. There's a lot of shift that happens. The reason we focus on it towards the end is because you're using all of that wonderful technique that you've learned in pitch, resonance, vocal tilt, and vocal weight to be able to access a lot of dynamics in your voice. So often what will happen is that if somebody raises their pitch, like let's say they raise their pitch floor, the range that they have is now just minimized. Yeah. We also want to raise the pitch ceiling.
Right.
And that's what you do through the pitch course. So once you shift your range up, you have to learn how to actually use that entire range.
Right.
Like, yeah. You want to be able to move around it and not just end up monotone or robotic.
Right. Yeah. Because no voice is just like one tone.
Yeah. And dynamics shift through every conversation. And so having access to them allows you to communicate things like, I'm energetic, I'm excited, or I'm pissed off and I'm frustrated. Like that's where a lot of the emotions come in. And then the last
culturally, like, and we haven't talked a ton, like we haven't like applied a huge anti-racist framework to this or anything. Nicole has mentioned several times, like the cultural aspect of voice throughout this process. But I would imagine dynamics is a huge area where like culture, community has like a big impact and effect on how people want to present or how they do.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. Dynamics is probably the thing that is most gendered in terms of like, if you take the more like physiological pieces out of it, dynamics is completely learned. Like all dynamics is learned. And so it's the thing that's most gendered through nature or nurture, not nature.
Right. Through society and contracts. And so also like highly, highly affected by like your socioeconomic status, your culture,
yes.
You know, your community, your like region, all of those things.
Dynamics is where you start thinking about like accents as well. Right.
Ooh.
Yes, accent modification. That it's interesting, right? Because that's something that's like if you have a physician watching or listening to this, if you have a client, whenever you have an individual who's not just standard American English speaking, maybe they're English second language, or they have some sort of accent that's outside of the Midwestern newscaster, there are things to keep in mind. So like somebody who is from England or has a British accent, more of the Queen's English, is naturally going to have a darker voice than somebody who is not, because they use darker vowels. And those individuals will really benefit from a program that is also led by a speech language pathologist like myself. I can't refer any other ones because I don't know any besides myself, because we are trained in accent modification. So we're aware of the really specific phonetic differences amongst languages that can be downfalls for maintaining the voice.
Nice. And I wonder, you know, I think none of the people's resources we shared were people of color, and someone with lived experience transitioning their voice as like a BIPOC person is probably going to be like an amazing resource for their community members, because there's so much of that dynamics that goes into that. And so that's definitely something we will work to add to our resource list. We might not find it for you right in this moment while we're recording, but we'll see what we can pull.
Yeah, I can look through. I'm part of a provider Facebook group that is for gender spectrum voice, and I can look through and see if like which BIPOC individuals who are on there are accepting clients, and help share that resource with you as well. The last two, projection. Projection feels pretty straightforward. A lot of the ways that we know to project are by taking a deep breath of air. So if you take a nice big breath and you yell, "Hey, stop that!" It's typically coming out darker than your typical voice. That does not work if you have done any work to like move towards the more higher, brighter lighter. Yeah, you've created a shorter, more narrow tube, and all of that air pressure blows it apart. So you have to find alternative ways to project your voice, which there are. I specifically use techniques from soprano opera singers who are able to project their voice over a symphony and an audience with no amplification and still be heard. And obviously they are in very high, bright voices. So that's the pedagogy I've pulled from to create techniques around that, as well as projecting your voice or like coughing, sneezing, laughing, these more reflexive sounds. So there's some work you can do on making sure that they align with your transition sound that you love. And then the last one is sustain. So not just sustaining your voice all day, though that is very much focused on. It's also, like we have talked about ad nauseum, in every environment and emotion. So I have people go through, now that they have their vocal recipe set, they know all of their settings on their vocal soundboard, go through every emotion on the emotion wheel, demonstrate it, identify the ones that are their Achilles heel, where they're least likely to maintain their transition sound with ease, identify what the recipe is that they're falling to, unfortunately, and then we go through together what to adjust to make sure that they're sustaining. So yeah. So an overview: foundations, vocal weight, vocal tilt, lips resonance, larynx resonance, pitch, dynamics, project, and sustain.
Amazing.
All of it. All of the areas. Yes.
Well, we've like kept our listeners for a very long time. And if you made it this far, we're super glad.
Yes. You made it to the part where we're more conversational.
Like we said, we will put up all of Nicole's socials and links so you can access their resources. We'll also throw up, like I said, the 2 other community members with lived experience, their resources, and we will work on finding some BIPOC resources because that is definitely a gap neither one of us should continue to have. And you as clinicians shouldn't either. So I
will let you know when I do the clinician education course.
We'll put your waiting list up there for that, because I will definitely sign up for that. I am so grateful to have you here. And if clinicians are interested in reaching out to you or connecting or networking, is that something you're open to?
1,000%. I would love it. I am all about networking. It's like my whole thing this year is to make sure to network. I am happy to do I'll send you a link for my calendar for a coffee talk, I call it, though I don't drink coffee. It's, you can do a quick consult if you have a question about a client or you don't know where to refer them. You can also, I'm happy to send you a list of resources that you can share with your clients as well. And Perfect. If you just want to chat with me, I'm happy to do that too. I love to talk. If you can't tell.
All right. All right. We're going to stop recording and let all of our listeners go back to their everyday life. And thank you so much.
You're welcome. Bye.